Hello and welcome to the On the Couch podcast, the podcast that gives you the view from the therapist chair. I'm your host, John Dennis, a licensed professional counselor. You're listening to OTC episode 25 with school psychologist Christy Peterson. Welcome back, OTC listeners. So it is almost September. I mean, you wouldn't know it because it's definitely gotten colder here in Lancaster, and pumpkin spice is flowing from everything. I've even heard that they have now pumpkin spice spam. So I have not verified that, but I imagine there are a lot of people in Hawaii that are excited about the prospect of pumpkin spice musubi. If you've never had the pleasure, I highly recommend. It's an amazing delicacy, spam sushi. So, but yes, I'm enjoying my pumpkin spice cold brew as we speak, and going to be bringing an episode to you all today that focuses on school psychologists, what their role is, IEPs, 504 plans, risk assessments, things like that. I imagine for those that have children, most school districts have gotten back in session, homeschool co-ops, things like that. So these are things that a lot of people wind up dealing with, and a lot of times we don't even know what we don't know. Until it affects us, a lot of times it's off our radar, and then all of a sudden we're trying to scramble to figure out, well, what does this mean, and what is the process, and all this paperwork that I have to fill out, and how long does the school have to respond, and all these different aspects to what a school psychologist does. So I'm going to be sharing this episode with Christy Peterson. She's the district school psychologist for actually about 1,800 students. And in her role as school psychologist, she actually covers all the grade levels in the two school districts that she provides services for. So she does assessments, she does consultation, she does intervention services, she works with the students, the teachers, the administration, the families, and to try to get needs met for a particular student where, a need has potentially been identified and they need to determine, okay, does this child actually have a need, and do they qualify for services, and then walking them through the whole process. Just a little bit of information and statistics surrounding this concept of IEPs and 504s. This comes from the IDEA, so that's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So this was back in 1975. They created this act. It was originally known as the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, and it mandated that schools have to provide a free and appropriate public school education for eligible students aged 3 to 21. And the statistics today come from the National Center for Education Statistics. So that's the nces.ed.gov. And in 2017, 2018, the number of students in that age range, the 3 to 21, that received special education services under the IDEA Act was 7 million. That's about 14% of all public school students. So among students receiving special education services, 34% of those had a specific learning disability. 19% had a specific speech or language impairment. 14% had OHI, the other health impairment. 10% had autism spectrum disorder. 7% had a developmental delay. 6% had an intellectual disability. 5% had an emotional disturbance. And then 2% had multiple disabilities, and 1% each had hearing impairment or an orthopedic impairment. Now, I know that sounds like a just crazy high number, but at the same time, I always preface any statistics by explaining they're kind of wrong. in that they're usually lower. Their numbers are usually underreported because you think, you may have students out there that they do have a struggle that they would qualify for, but maybe they just haven't gotten assessed for it. Maybe the parents don't want them assessed or to receive services or things like that. But a lot of times, same as they say with our education, it's out of date by the time you get it. 5 years after, we've learned new things and more things. So the statistics, while that's a huge number, it's probably actually higher. And then when you take a look at the statistics broken down by race or ethnicity, 14% of those students are Caucasian, 16% African American, 13% Hispanic, 7% Asian, 11% Pacific Islander, 18% were American Indian or Alaska Native, and then 14% were biracial, so 2 or more races. Obviously, this is a topic that affects so many families, so many children throughout the country. So I hope that you'll enjoy this conversation with Christy Peterson, and I hope that it helps somebody out there, some family, some child, to get the services that they so dearly need. So I have here on the show Christy Peterson, who is a school psychologist in Western Pennsylvania. She covers an entire school district. So Christy, welcome to the On the Couch podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for being on. I know you've been enjoying your summer and going to a bunch of different things with conferences and stuff. So yeah, thanks for being able to be on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity.
So at the beginning, tell us about yourself, background, what made you want to work in school psychology, whatever you want to share.
Yeah, sure. So I went to college with no idea what I wanted to do. And, through taking the general courses you have to take with your undergrad, I took a general psych course, and through that really got me interested in psychology. So I'm really grateful for that professor. But in that class, I really started to get interested in human behavior, why people do the things that they do. Even the worst behaviors people have, it's always interesting to me to actually get to the root of why they're doing it. It's fascinating. But then also through those classes, just learning more and more about the mind and people's thinking and just how important it is. You can have the best physical health and all of that, but if your mind is not well, if something's wrong there, what good is it? You're not experiencing and perceiving things the way that you should or coping appropriately. So that's really what drew me into the field of psychology. And while working on that, I worked with a lot of youth in different programs. And so I needed to figure out, I knew when I went in to get my bachelor's that I would then go get my master's. So that was a little trickier, figuring out what program I wanted to go into. And through your work as well, I'm sure you know that the earlier you intervene in a problem, the better the outcome is going to be. Definitely. So for me, I looked at it and thought, where can I make the biggest difference? And it starts in childhood. And then a step further, where do kids spend the most of their time? And that would be in the school setting. So that's what really drew me into school psychology. More than that, I have, I feel like everyone has their personal story. And my family has my nephew, his name's Riley. And he is just the absolute light of our family. Everyone adores him, loves him so much. And he has a severe intellectual disability. Okay. And through that, he does have a lot of challenges. I wouldn't say limitations, but certainly things that are a little more difficult for him. Mm-hmm. And, from day one, everyone put limits on him and said, he'll never do this, he'll never do that. And he has just continued to exceed those. Every single limit put on him, he smashes it and does even better than anyone expects.
Man, that's awesome.
It is. And so from watching him, it really instilled in me a passion to show people what those people can do that people think can't do things, And everyone, even those with disabilities or adversity, they have the ability to learn, to grow, accomplish, and it might look different for different people, but they're able to do that and set goals. And so that's really what bolstered me and continues to motivate me with my job in school psychology.
Oh, man, that's so amazing. Thank you so much for saying that. I think that needs to get communicated so much more. So give us just, if you can give a brief summary, what is a school psychologist?
A lot of people don't realize that their schools have a school psychologist. Typically, a school will have one, but if not, they would contract to their local, intermediate unit or just someone independent to come in and do that. It can be called different things, an educational specialist, a learning facilitator, but typically a school psychologist. Mm-hmm. And what I would view the role as is really identifying and removing barriers that are there to students learning. So when we think of learning, traditionally you would think of in school a student learning to read, write, do math, those sorts of things. And those are all very important. And we do work with those a lot of the time. But it's not just academics that we're focused on. When someone leaves a school, the school's goal really should be to have a well-rounded individual that's leaving and able to not just function, but to succeed and contribute, to their community and have their goals outside of school once they're finished. And so it's our goal to not just teach them the academics, but make sure they have the behavioral skills, social skills, coping with, emotional functioning, and then also for some students, those daily living skills that they're equipped when they leave school. So we're working to help them be successful in that way, but to remove the barriers, that's a big, that encompasses a lot.
Yeah.
So, the obvious one with my job would be a disability. If a student has a disability that's causing them not to succeed, then we would do evaluations to determine the presence of that and then go from there with helping them. But oftentimes it's not just disabilities. Once we're going into an evaluation, we find that there's other things at play. Maybe a student's not reading and it's because they have a vision problem we don't realize, or maybe there's a hearing deficit. Sure. Some students have English language needs, they're not proficient in the language, and that could be a problem for learning. But more than that, I try to remind teachers, just other people, just to remember that when a student's in the school building, we don't know what's going on for them outside of the building. So they might not have slept the night before, or maybe they didn't eat before they came to school, or there could be stressors there, that are causing them not to focus in school. So I view the school psychologist really as a detective and trying to figure out what's going on. And then with a team, figure out, now we know what the problem is. What can we do now to alleviate that and help the student be resilient and be successful in whatever the area is they're struggling. So a lot of that is evaluations. I'm the only school psychologist for 2 school districts, and they're small, so that I know it sounds bigger than it might even be.
I was going to say,
maybe
wow.
I'm minimizing it, I'm not sure.
Possibly.
So I do everything from the students coming in from early intervention through the ones leaving their senior year. So I would cover everything, K to 12. So a lot of the time for me personally is spent doing evaluations and having meetings around that. And then there's other teams I'm on that focus on prevention. You see something, let's act immediately and do something about it.
Now, there you're talking student, like SAP.
Mm-hmm. We have SAP, and we do child study team. They can also call them instructional support teams, IST, CST. Once you're in special education, it's acronym crazy.
Alphabet soup.
Yes, and no one knows what you're talking about when you know.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that's interesting. You described it as the detective. So it almost seems like a blend of detective, social worker, and psych assessment kind of stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that term evaluation gets thrown around a lot. So I guess if you could just give an overview of typically how do students get in front of you, and what does that assessment entail? Okay.
There's typically 2 ways a student would be brought to my attention. And often I'm already involved, before I get an actual referral for an evaluation. And that's because I'm lucky in a small district to be able to do that. So the best way would be, because the school is going through the meetings we just talked about, like child study team or whatever process it might be. Schools should, if they're doing things the best way that they should be doing it, they should have levels of interventions already available for students. So students would be in the regular classroom and maybe they're at risk. And all of this is based on data. So we're collecting information. We're seeing they're not doing well. So we put them in a small group per se, and maybe we work on something and we help them that way. So we basically exhaust all of our resources that we have while collecting data through the general education. And when they're not making the progress we want them to make, they would then refer them to me for an evaluation to determine if there is an educational disability at play that's causing a problem. The other way it could come to me is if a parent requests that happen. I would advise parents, before they would just make a request for that, to have a meeting with the school just to see what's going on and making sure, what they're seeing is what the school's seeing and, just having that open dialogue. But I do understand all schools are different and everyone has different experiences. So it also makes sense when that doesn't happen.
Now, with a parent that wants to request that, does that have to be in writing, at least for your school district? I know you can't speak, nationwide, but is there like a particular form parents have to use, or yeah?
So I would, if a parent wants an evaluation to happen, I would strongly recommend them to put it in writing that documents that it happened. But if they just say that they want the child evaluated, there is a form in Pennsylvania that would be issued to them within 10 days for them to fill out to actually document in writing the request.
Okay.
But really bypass that and just put it in writing to begin with, and you just shaved some time off of the evaluation getting started.
Sure. The back and forth.
Yeah, and then I'll say that the whole process we'll talk about here is very timeline. There's a lot of days involved. And so for a parent, if they really want that to happen, I would put it in writing and give that to the school and even keep a copy for themselves, to make sure that it goes forward like it should.
Okay. And so for you, here it's almost August, by the time this airs, it's going to be probably beginning of September. You're going to be super busy, I imagine. Is there, like heavy season to
yes.
assessments?
There is. I would say that when it gets the busiest is around the time of the first report card coming out, because that's when they see very clearly. Yes, we see very clearly on the parent end that they're concerned about grades.
Yeah.
The school's requests take maybe a little bit longer because we're seeing they're not doing well, but we're doing something to fix it, or maybe the parent doesn't know that, or maybe, I would hope the school's doing that. So it might take our side of it a little bit longer. But yeah, around that time, and then towards the end of the school year, when suddenly people realize a student might not pass for the year, and then it becomes this frantic, rush to figure out how we can prevent that from happening.
Oh, so you're saying right around like tax time and spring break and
yes.
No stress at all.
Very busy. None at all.
Okay. So either the request comes in from the parent, or the request comes in from the school district of team meeting. A student has been identified. Hey, we think we need you to take a look at this, and from there, what's involved in it? So
from there, either if it's the school or the parents, we still have to issue a permission to evaluate form. So
Sure.
We do have to have, the parent has to give us informed consent, know what we're doing and all of that. And once we receive that form, so they sign it, return it, the day we receive that, we have 60 calendar days to have an evaluation completed.
Okay.
So again, I would urge parents, when you get that paperwork, send it back immediately, because that's going to get a timeline started. So in those 60 days, that evaluation, it really depends on what the cause is. Yes. Typically what we're seeing, is a lot of a student, if say they have some academic, say they're struggling with reading, for example, I I collect a lot of information first. So, I get information from the teachers, from the parents, the school nurse, anyone working with the student, just everyone who might have any input at all. I gather all of that. Mm-hmm. And then I go into the classroom and I observe the student, trying to observe them in the area or the subject they're having difficulty in. A behavior evaluation looks different. We're going to do a lot more observation, but say they can't read, I'm going to go into the reading class, observe them, and make sure, are they paying attention? So I calculate their time on task to see how attentive they are and if there's any issues there. So we do that. And then after I've done that, because I don't like the student to know who I am at that point, after that, then I would pull them into my room for a little bit. Typically 2 sessions, I would say, because if you do everything at once, they tend to get tired.
Sure.
But that's when we do the direct testing. Now, every districts might do things a little differently. There's 2 ways you can do my evaluation. So I'm just speaking to the way that my school does them. So I would administer a cognitive assessment,
okay,
and try to get an idea of what their cognitive abilities are. And, there's a lot that goes into that with their processing speed and working memory and reasoning ability. It's complicated and a lot that goes into it. But from that, we can then make a prediction of how they should be achieving. And then we would do standardized academic testing as well, looking at the area they're struggling with and see if they are significantly below where they should be for their age or their grade level, and also for where we would predict them to be cognitively in that area.
Now, with some of that, like, are you getting into, the Wechsler intelligence scales,
mm-hmm.
and
yes.
Halstead-Reitan, and, I always joke about the Woodcock-Johnson.
Yes. So the ones we would be with Woodcock-Johnson, the WISC, more acronyms there, and the Stanford Binet is one that we use. But I use a lot with the Wechsler scales since they all kind of go together.
Yep.
And then I would use the same Wechsler scale for the achievement. And there's a lot. There's a lot of different assessments. I normally give a broad one. So I would give just a broad one of like reading, writing, math, see how the student does. And then if there's an area they seem to be not doing as well in, then I would pull out some other ones that are specific to that area and kind of go from there. So that one's broad, and then you kind of narrow it down from there to see what the problem is.
All right.
There's also rating scales we do as well. I do them for all students. Again, psychologists might differ, but I'll have teachers and parents fill those out just to see if there's any underlying behavioral, social, emotional problem that might be contributing as well, or might be there as a result of whatever the problem is, because that certainly needs treated then as well.
Okay. And to go back to something you had said earlier, I had a question come in from a listener that asked about, let's say on the flip side, where the school really wants the child evaluated, but the parent does not. Mm-hmm. I mean, you don't have to sign the consent, but is there a point at which a school could really push the issue on that?
They could, and that has happened. I would encourage conversations before you would completely say no to that, just so that everyone's on the same page of, I think that if I step out of my psychologist role and into the parent role, I think it can be really intimidating and really scary. And, we hear the word special education, and it's terrifying. And we think of what it looked like when we were kids, and it's so different today. And I think just having a conversation of why that recommendation is there, maybe showing them if the student qualified, what would that look like, just easing, concerns. But if the parent truly, even with that, does not want that to happen, they have the right to say no. The school can go through measures of due process to have an evaluation done. However, at the end of that evaluation, the parent can still say no, they don't want the service. So I would even say the evaluation is not saying you consent to any supports, any special education supports.
You're just
it just gives
agreeing
information.
To the assessment. Yeah,
absolutely. And then at the end of that, there's another step. Then if they qualified and special education was recommended, then you very clearly have to say yes or no. And that's if they say no, the school could push that, but it is what it is. They parents have rights, and they're able to use those rights and say no if they disagree.
Mm-hmm. And with the work that you do, what are common myths that you run into?
Oh, there's probably a lot. I think one thing that I've heard, not directly to me, but you just hear it in general, with school psychologists, is that we will say we'll deny a student's eligibility for supports because we're like saving the school district money, or for financial reasons. I can see why a parent would possibly think that. And I'll say from my work experience and my colleagues, I've never heard that to be the reason why a school psychologist did that. I've never personally felt any pressure financially. And actually, on the flip side of that, school districts are obligated to identify all students with disabilities. And if you don't, there are legal ramifications for doing that. So actually, the flip side would happen that it could be very expensive if you don't identify that student and give them the support they need. So
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, that's one thing I hear. Another, I don't know if it's a myth, but just an idea I think that parents can get frustrated with is that their doctors, I see this a lot, this is actually becoming more and more prevalent, is, a doctor will recommend an IEP or a 504 plan. So they'll put on a script pad, this child needs special education, or, a psychologist outside of the school will recommend that didn't actually do the testing that we would be doing. And so parents can, I think, get confused and possibly frustrated at the idea that we don't just honor that, but that there are very clear guidelines legally that we have to follow to determine if they are eligible. And I certainly respect any doctor. I'm no, physician. But when they make that recommendation, it's without input from the school to see what's actually happening in the school. So we have more of that input to guide that decision because we're the ones with that data. So that is also something that happens a lot. I'm trying to think if there's any other ones. I think the only other thing right now that stands out in my mind is just some confusion with disability names, because a child might have a disability from like the DSM or something outside of school, and we have educational disability categories that are called something different. So there's often some conflict, if a child outside of the school, they're evaluated and identified with, say, dyslexia, they bring that to the school and we say they have a learning disability. There's often, but no, my child has dyslexia. And it's like, well, yeah, but it's the same thing. Like things are just called different things. So that can be confusing as well.
Yeah. And you hear that a lot of times with where I've run into it the most is the Asperger's autism spectrum change. A lot of people were not happy with that.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like you were saying, it's the professional language. It's it's just an operational definition, and a lot of times trying to help parents to not get so caught up on the term that's being used. It's okay. We have to use this in order to get them the access to the services. Yes,
and it does not matter what we call it. It's just it opens the door. Just figuring out what it is.
And that kind of leads us into are there particular trends that you're seeing in school psychology, either with increase in diagnoses or disorders that are being identified, or different things you're seeing?
Yes, I would say in general an increase in just mental health challenges that students are facing with like depression, a lot of like oppositional defiant disorder, things like that. In kindergarten especially, this is where it's most glaring to me. Each group coming in each year, it seems like they have less and less like self-regulation skills. Like it feels like each group has more difficulty in, controlling their impulses, being able to listen and follow the rules, cope and not have, outbursts and things like that. And so that just seems to be increasing. And also ADHD seems to be increasing as a diagnosis, that So, I mean, so I would say just on my end with evaluations, I'm seeing a lot more evaluations for like behavioral support, emotional support, and just, support for like ADHD. So that would be called other health impairment, with our evaluations. So
OHI.
Yes.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of the the alphabet soup with like IEP and 504 and 302 and but yeah, I definitely would echo that. Obviously, I'm not a school psychologist. I'm not seeing it the way that you are, but I see a huge increase in anxiety.
Yes.
I've seen so many kids that they are like opting out of public school because of anxiety, and they're going the cyber or the homeschool route because of that. Some of it here in like the Harrisburg and Lancaster area, because of some of the schools in these areas are very large. So I can see that some. And then, definitely just what you're talking about with the regulation, so emotional regulation. I was interviewing Dr. Jonathan Singer recently, and I was so sad. He told me he had actually worked with a 4-year-old who was suicidal.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and it was like, seemingly like legitimate risk assessment, suicidal, which I was just like, I can't even wrap my mind around that. With services, IEP versus 504, can you kind of give just the brief rundown?
I was going to say that could be a big conversation.
Yeah.
So both of them are protected by law, and they're protecting students with disabilities. So they both have that mission, to protect those students with disabilities and to help them. So 504, that's from the Rehabilitation Act, 1973. And what that's basically doing is, if you think of like the Americans with Disabilities Act, like it's all about not discriminating and giving equal access. So for students, it's giving them equal access to like the general education. So to qualify for that, you would need to have a mental or physical disability, and it needs to significantly impact a major life function. And it's very broad, the criteria for that, which makes it a little more difficult to determine, who does and does not require a 504 plan. But really, again, it's really pushing access. So, the easy one to understand, for an example, is if a student has like a physical impairment and they're in a wheelchair. For that example, we would make sure there's ramps to get up, into the school, and they would have access to an elevator. They might need they might need to leave class early to get in the hallway, and their locker might need adapted to reach their books, and gym class might need changed a little bit. So it's really adapting and accommodating for that disability. When you take that to the one we're seeing more, it's students with like ADHD. And how they would be having trouble accessing general education is because they're unable to attend to the instruction, therefore they're not accessing it. And so for that one, it's about accommodations to help them, again, get to the instruction. So they might need to, these are just examples and it would all be individualized, but maybe they need to sit in an area that has the least distraction, and that might be the front, or it might just be whatever location is the quietest and they can focus. They might need things broken down for them. So where one student might have 20 questions on their page, that could just overwhelm someone with ADHD because they can't focus. So maybe give them 3 at a time and break it down. Or their medication might wear off at the end of the day. So take a test, make sure tests are in the morning. So it's really accommodating for that disability. Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of in the name, individualized education.
So where then changes from that to an IEP. So an IEP would be an individualized education program, and that is special education. And that's protected, under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and Pennsylvania has a law as well. So with that, to qualify for that, so 504, you just need any of those impairments. It's the ones that a doctor would, identify. So at school, there's 14 educational disabilities a student would need to qualify for. So they would have to be evaluated by the school psychologist or a speech therapist. There's other ones, not just under my umbrella, but they'd have to meet the criteria under the law for one of those 14 disabilities. And then they would have to show a need for specialized instruction. So that's the difference. The instruction piece is the difference from a 504 to an IEP. We are changing the instruction that they're delivering to meet whatever the goal is or whatever the need is that they're having. So with that, if take reading, for example, if a student, say they're 3 grade levels behind, we could accommodate them and say their 4th grade reading class by reading things to them and all of that. But it makes more sense. We need to change their instruction and teach them at the level they're at, to make progress. Mm-hmm. So the IEP would have goals in it set forth each year to track their progress with the instruction they're receiving. So does that answer your question, the difference between the two?
Yeah. No, thank you.
Okay.
And how often do those have to be reassessed or revamped? Is that, I think of in our line of work, a lot of times with like treatment plans, it's like quarterly or things like that.
Both a 504 and an IEP should be updated annually. So every year you would have an IEP team meeting to look at the IEP and to see and to change the goals. And the plan is that they've met their goal, and then you need to change the goal. If they haven't, you need to change what you're doing because it's not making progress. But each year you would do that. However, parents can call a meeting for that at any time. So you can make revisions. It's kind of like an open document. There's a process to change it, and it has to be in writing. But, that it can happen at any time. But legally, every year, those 2 plans would be looked at with the school.
And I apologize ahead of time to all of you school psychologists out there that I may be making more work for.
Oh, no.
But again, I really wanted to talk with you because I know just from the counselor end of things, there's so many parents out there that they just don't know what they don't know. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they meet with you, they get an assessment, you determine, okay, yes, there is a need here. They do meet one of those, either, IEP, 504. In terms of start to finish of like when the referral gets made to you and an assessment gets scheduled, is it like, okay, it's got to be in and done by a certain time, or that could...
The evaluation as a whole?
Well, yeah, the evaluation, the report writing, the determination, yeah.
Yes. Now, I'll speak 504 is very different because the law isn't as stringent. That doesn't necessarily... Some schools don't even do evaluations for that. Like take a student with a peanut allergy, I would not be involved in that. That would be the nurse working with the team. So it really just depends on what the need is. So that one's a little different. And each school, that one's very different in the way schools approach it. So that one is a whole different thing. But for an IEP with special education, so from the start point, so it can take a while if the timeline extends. So once I get that parent to sign the permission form, I have 60 days until I have to give them an evaluation report. They have to have the report in their hands 60 calendar days from the day I get their permission form.
Okay, 60 calendar. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. If they qualify for an IEP, then a timeline starts and they have 30 calendar days to then have the IEP in their hands. Okay. From there, if they sign permission, we have 10 days to start implementing it. So really, if you use all of that time, it can take some time to get things going.
Yeah. And I really wanted to highlight that because I think, again, a lot of parents have either these, expectations of like, yeah, you just snap your fingers and it just happens right away, right?
Yes.
Like how, and especially for you where you're district wide, like you're probably, driving all over to get to these schools, it doesn't move as fast as they want it to typically.
No, it doesn't. And to be honest, it doesn't move as fast as I would like it to. There are some students that, there's some evaluations that probably could have been prevented, and they take time, just as much time as the others. But then you'll have a student who desperately needs help, but you have so many other ones, and the timeline for those ones is ahead of that one, and you just can't get to it. You have other ones legally to get done so quickly. So, it can be frustrating, and also for parents to keep in mind, that calendar stops in the summer. So the last day of school, it stops, and then it picks back up when school starts. So that's the break of it. However, a Christmas break, if there's a spring break, a lot of snow days, those days count in our timeline. So it just keeps chipping away, and it makes it even tighter to get things done. So it unfortunately for everybody, and for parents, I know that can be frustrating, but for them to also know, at least from my perspective, it can be frustrating for the psychologist too, just how long it can take.
Okay. And I'm glad you brought that up, because it kind of dovetails with one of the listener questions that came in, which was my kid is on the list at the end of the school year, and then you hit the summer, does that wipe the slate clean? And then I've got to re-request it come fall?
Yeah, and no, they won't need to. So, I have a few right now that I'll get to when school starts. So say they signed the permission form in May, and the timeline started, and say 15 days went past. So from day one, when school starts, I'll have 45 days to get it done. So you just pause it, and then it picks back up. But if they already signed that consent form, the ball is already rolling, and it needs to continue and be finished. Now, if they said to a teacher, I want my child tested, and they didn't get any paperwork, then that one could fall through the cracks, and they should definitely follow up when school starts.
Okay. All right. And are there other pieces to IEP and 504 that you'd like to address, things that you wish families knew about it?
I think families should know that on both of those, there are clear sections for parent information, and the school. And again, I'm speaking to what they should do. I'm not naive to the fact that they might not always, but they should be either calling or sending forms or something to obtain input, making at least 3 attempts to get that information. And it just highlights that parents' participation is wanted and it is important. They know their child better than anybody, and they're the ones that will know what might work and what might not. And so they are really important members of that. So I would just highlight that, there
Sure.
are clear areas for that.
You're listening to OTC episode 25 with school psychologist Christy Peterson. We'll be right back after a brief word from our sponsor.
Life is hard, but Parenting and Family Solutions is here to help. Our board-certified counselors are easy to talk to and offer a safe, encouraging environment to help you with your unique needs. We specialize in helping clients of all ages deal with depression, anxiety, marriage issues, screen addiction, and ADHD, just to name a few. We now have daytime and evening appointments available in Harrisburg and Lancaster and accept most major insurance plans. Visit our website to learn more at www.parentfamilysolutions.com or give us a call at 717-602-5560. Let us help you build a stronger family and a healthier you.
Kind of shifting gears to sometimes there are other assessments that you have to do, like risk assessments. What is that? What is a risk assessment?
So if a student is either made outward comments or is strongly suspected that they might be of harm to themselves or someone else, that's when a risk assessment would take place. In some districts, it might be just the school psychologist. That is something that they are responsible for. The way my job works, and I'm in 2 districts, I'm every other week in districts. So, and I'm spread thin in that way. So guidance counselors, are involved then as well. So I can't say that I'm the one doing them, but talking, the main one we would see are the suicide, the comments of suspicion that they might take their own lives. So, with that, what I think that schools are hopefully doing well with is when a student actually makes the comment that they intend to hurt themselves, acting upon that. So, if a student did that, we would meet with that student, notify parents, administration, and not leave that child alone. They would stay with someone at all times. But the goal in a conversation with that student is to determine their intent. Do they have a plan? Do they have the means to carry out that plan? What's the timeline for that? And these are uncomfortable things, to have a conversation about, but they're very, very important to determine how serious of a risk this actually is. Some schools might have very detailed on paper, a risk assessment that it says, and they go through that. Our school doesn't necessarily have that. However, I think sometimes with that on paper, you just check a box and go to the next question and then the next one. And it's just important to listen. That's the biggest thing. Listen and ask the questions you need to ask. And from that, I typically always err on the side of caution and will contact a crisis worker to meet with the student and then do their own assessment then to decide if this child does need to, in fact, go to the hospital or to an inpatient facility to receive help. And I think it's always better to maybe go to the most extreme response to that and be wrong than to not do that and be wrong. You know what I mean?
Sure.
To not go to those limits and have
them act on it.
Yeah. So I think, when an actual threat is stated, I think schools are doing well at that. I think people in general need to improve upon is responding to the warning signs of someone who's at risk for suicide.
And can you highlight some of those that you've seen?
Absolutely. So, if you're seeing someone who is suddenly more angry or irritable, a change in appearance, maybe in school they're having declining grades, broken relationships, maybe their appetite's changing, making those final arrangements, giving away prized possessions or saying goodbyes to people, just things like that to look for. And what is encouraging is that, in 2014, the law was passed where teachers do need trained 4 hours every 5 years on this. And I think it needs to be a lot more, but that is, a starting place.
Sure.
We need to be teaching students. What's tough is that a teacher, especially at like the middle school or high school level, has how many students they see every day. And they might not see these signs because that student might blend in with a crowd, and it might be the quiet kid that you don't suspect or the high achiever that you don't suspect. But their friends are the ones the peers that are around them every day so closely. They need to be the ones also to have this knowledge and, to respond if they see anything, and to not be afraid to ask someone how they're doing and taking the time to have that conversation. And if you're worried, ask them if they do intend to harm themselves. Like, that's okay to have that conversation and to be comfortable with that. But yeah, I think that's where we need to work a little bit better on.
Well, and I know I kind of follow along on the Gottman Institute, a lot of their social media, and they had posted something in the state of Florida. They're going to start requiring mental health classes for public school students starting grade 6th. And similar to what you were saying with the teachers, where they'll receive at least 5 hours of classes each year. So it's a starting place at least.
Yes, that's encouraging.
And with that, sometimes there's self-injury either outside of schools or actually in the schools, and so that kind of factors in with the risk assessments as well. How about stuff coming from social media? Like, do schools pay attention to that stuff and then do risk assessments off of that? Or
yes, they do. If there's threats made, that's actually, it's funny you say that. That's happened a few times just over the past year or so. where someone, maybe the school didn't necessarily see that, but someone has notified the school that maybe threats were made in that way, and it's truly handled the same way. And that one, it's been more of threats to perhaps harm the school or someone in the school, in which case maybe the police are notified. And then there's a lot of presence these days of, the police will come through the building every once in a while and be present and all of that, but we'll have more of that presence as well. But they'll certainly look into that, let everybody know. The community's notified if there are any risks like that. Calls will go out to notify everyone and to not just notify them of the risk, but also to let them know it's being handled and it's being looked at, and that person won't be necessarily in the building until the situation is sorted out.
Okay. So with risk assessment, let's say you're meeting with a kid, you determine, yes, they seem pretty high in terms of that, lethality, as we talk in the business.
Yes.
Which to the listener means that, yes, they have checked a number of those boxes with, like, they have a plan, they have access to that plan, they have, like timeline, motivation, that kind of stuff. Where does it go from there? Is that you contact the parents and strongly recommend that they be taken to be evaluated, or you're contacting emergency services, the school is doing that, or
I guess it can vary. What I've been involved with has been contacting actual workers to come there and meet with the child and take it from there. And then the parent can come and meet them, while that's happening. My fear is always, you never ever want to just send a student home, when that's the case, assuming parents are going to follow up on that, because you just don't know. And I would hope that they would, but unfortunately, being, realistic about some situations, they don't.
Yeah.
So, from there, then they would go to a hospital and go from there with the type of treatment that they would see fit. So I would always err on getting it addressed at school immediately, as soon as possible, than to just send them home with the parents on board to get help. However, we have had parents that come right in, pick the child up, and take them where they need to go to get help. So it certainly can go both ways. I think it's situational. You can get a feel for, what's going to happen when the parents do arrive.
Yeah, and I going back to myths, I would say in terms of, IEPs, 504s, but also risk assessment, maybe not myth, probably more on a trend topic of, unfortunately, a lot of parents downplay and sort of minimize the concerns that the school is bringing up, and oh no, they just it's this or it's that, they don't need to be evaluated, they don't need any assessment, and a lot, unfortunately, that have a very negative view of mental and behavioral health, and
Yes.
So if they go to be evaluated, do they have to, you think of almost like you have to get a doctor's note to come back to school, or like to show up again, or how does that work?
I'm not involved necessarily with their acceptance back into the school, but I would say they don't necessarily need a note per se. But it would be in the best interest of the school, and if they're doing things the very best that they should, it would be having that information prior to them coming in. If a student's receiving some kind of treatment and they're not present in the school building, we want their team, their professional staff, to be communicating with us, knowing when they're coming back, so that we can know what their needs are, and be prepared to support that student when they transition back into the school.
And off of that, if a student does return after being either evaluated or hospitalized, do you have to meet with them as a follow-up, and you're doing more assessments and then things once they return?
So the guidance counselor, or the psychologist, in my case, it's typically the guidance counselor, since I might not be there, but they would be meeting with them, yes, to follow up. In terms of their needs at school, it just varies from case to case. Just because a student received, say, a 72-hour treatment somewhere doesn't mean that they need, emotional support services in school through an IEP, but maybe it does. Maybe there is something deep rooted there. It's something to explore. So there should be conversations about that and making sure you look at all options. Because again, we're obligated to identify all those students with disabilities and recommend the appropriate supports for them.
Yeah. Are there other aspects to risk assessment? Any other things there you feel parents need to know?
I think just with that risk in general, I think that all parents should take the time to educate themselves on the topic so that they themselves can see those warning signs and they themselves know what to do if they see warning signs, or to notify the school if they're having any concerns. And again, it's okay to ask your children to have those uncomfortable conversations and to see what's going on. But just spend time with your kids and know when they're acting out of the norm and just be prepared to act if there's any kind of concern. So I think, for just parents to educate themselves on what those risks are and what steps to take if they're concerned.
Yeah, and off of that conversation with Jonathan Singer, which I think that air date wise, it's going to follow this episode. So I'm going to have links to the American Association for Suicidology and a couple of others that have trainings, like free trainings for parents. And I think the message throughout a lot of this is, parents being able to have those conversations with the school district, with you or any school psychologist, but also with their child.
Absolutely. I would say too, it's just hitting me. It's just coming into my head here with suicide specifically. Just we have this picture of what a depressed child looks like or what they might be acting like, and it's not always the kid that you think it's going to be. And my husband spent several years going the whole way across Pennsylvania for suicide prevention and met with so many families, and it was remarkable what he accomplished and what he did. But what was resounding was the families he met with. It was the star athlete or the homecoming queen or just people that were so maybe outgoing or that you just wouldn't expect. So just to have your eyes open that things aren't just what you think they're going to be and to look a little deeper.
Well, and again, so glad you said that, because in my mind, I always go to Robin Williams. I always think of, just so happy and funny and laughing and joking around on the outside. And then, obviously we all know how that wasn't the case on the inside.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are there other aspects to your role that you'd like to highlight, maybe that we didn't cover, within the IOP and the 504?
I think a lot of my time is spent in the process, as we talked about. I would love more than anything to do more counseling and things like that, and hopefully over time I'm able to do that. But a lot of time spent trying to maybe communicate with community agencies or resources, trying to help link supports outside of the school to help the child. There's time spent doing that. And just trying, I meet a lot with teachers to consult with them, to help teach them interventions to carry out for students and that sort of thing. But I think really for me personally, that assessment piece and the consultation piece would be the two biggest ones that I focus on.
Okay. And I will give you a chance to sort of highlight for the listeners, like, there's a lot that goes into the report writing.
Yes, there is.
It is quite involved and very time consuming. And it's not just this automatic cut and paste thing that is ready in a day.
Yes.
Would you like to speak more to that? Or?
It does take a while. I would say for every student you evaluate, then there's a lot of things you have to score, a lot of things then to type up and make sense of. And it takes a lot of time to write those reports. And I would like for people to take the time to read all of them and to read what it says, because it is important. And you do all of this with a child to come up with recommendations. And so just taking the time to read through that, because it does have implications, at home too, the things that we're seeing that maybe they're struggling with. But yeah, just that it takes time. So you're not going to, if a parent contacts and says, when did you to actually physically test the student, you might say it was yesterday, but you won't see a report for some time. Like, it might take a little while to get to that. So just being patient with that process.
Yes. I guess I wanted to highlight that for you, or set you up for that, because again, I think a lot of parents, we're Americans. Things never go as fast as we want them to. We want it now. And especially when it comes to our kids, sort of the tiger moms and tiger dads, they get a little antsy. But at the same time, that balance of a lot of times they also have to. They have to advocate for their kid and really sort of bang the drum to get the services in place. So
yeah, absolutely.
So I don't want to put you on the spot too much, or your school district. Are you able to give sort of a general number of, like, how many assessments would you say you did in the last school year? Or I don't know if you're able to speak to that across both districts or whatever.
I count it up each year just to keep track of trends and things like that, because that can help us see how we're doing with different things. I did around, if you combine the two school districts, I would say around 70 this year.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's what's interesting, I actually brought this up to one of my supervisors at the end of the school year, was that we've put a lot of things in place to reduce kids needing to be evaluated that aren't, like, we want to make sure, before we put the things in place, we were evaluating kids that didn't necessarily need evaluated and they weren't qualifying. And so the numbers started to drop then of evaluations we were doing, because we were identifying most of the kids we were testing. What I've seen looking at this year and even last year is that the number has stayed about the same of the students I've evaluated, but they're all mostly qualifying for support. So to me, that's showing that the students' needs are increasing and how much support that they need.
Okay. Wow. Man, 70 in a year, that's a lot. Okay. Man.
It's job security is what that is.
Yeah, I mean, I joke about that too, that it's, it's great for me. It's just, it means things aren't going so great for other people.
I know.
Yeah. Sometimes I wish we were out of a job, but
yes, no, absolutely. I say that when we're teaching, teachers how to implement things, or it's the purpose is to not have my job and they can then carry that on without me.
Mm-hmm. What about on the tail end of a student's career as they're getting ready to age out? I don't know if you can speak to that aging out process. So often I find that parents assume that an IEP or a 504 is going to roll over into the next phase of life, whether that's college or just work. I don't know if you see that and you can talk about that at all.
Yeah, I see the trend I would see is, parents just assuming everything's being done and it's going to just carry over, and then not hearing us when we say things need to happen, leading up to that. So in an IEP, once a student's 14, they need to start there's a transition section in the IEP. So once a student's 14, that section needs to start being completed, where you're working towards their goals and planning for that. But more than that, students, they are able to go to school until they're 21. And then at that point, they can't be there. They age out, like I think you had said. So when they leave, they really want to be in touch with OVR, the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, to open a case with them. And you want to get those things started before you're a graduating senior and start to get things. They have a lot of support and funding there that could possibly help a child, get ready for their transition. And there's other agencies as well, and it would just differ with what community you're in. But parents need to be the ones pulling the trigger for that and signing paperwork for that and getting that going, getting cases open. And then a worker can help with that transition once the school's not there to do so. And they might need data from, say, my evaluation to qualify for certain things with their like cognitive ability or whatever those scores might be. But they can also do their own evaluations, typically to determine their own eligibility for certain services.
Okay. And and usually that's where I'm educating people about, like you said, OVR, intellectual disability waivers, developmental disability waivers. And usually my advice to anyone that will listen is like, start now. Start, don't waste, because a lot of times it can take a while, just like your assessments, there's that process.
There is. And there are, also for parents to know, there are supports in a college for students that do have disabilities. When I went to grad school, I actually worked in the Office of Learning Services where we would do evaluations and determine what they needed. And it just looks different. We're not going to change the instruction, but there's accommodations available for students. They just need to work on their own self-advocacy to go and get it. It's not going to be handed to them, but there are opportunities there to help, kind of like we were talking about with the 504, to alleviate the barrier that disability might be causing to them accessing the instruction.
Yes. And that's, at least in my experience, it's been through the Department of Disability Services at the college. And I know a lot of people really don't like that name and really bristle at it, but that's a lot of what it is. And I've even heard of a lot of colleges starting specific programs for students on the autism spectrum attending college. So I know of, I think it was Kutztown. I think I'd heard of like IUP, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and a couple of others. So yeah, definitely, I would echo that as well. Thank you.
Yeah.
In terms of, I want to give you a chance to talk about the positives. Talk about what are the success stories you've seen, because a lot of times we think of all the awful negative stuff.
Yeah, I think that's general life, and I think people just need to train themselves to focus on positives as well, because there are negatives everywhere. But I don't know. I've seen a lot of positives. I've seen students that wouldn't come to school, and they were perceived as like the bad kid. They got that name on them, and they had all these behavior problems, and you get to the root of it and they like can't read, and somehow they're in like middle school. How frustrating that must be. And once you figure out what's going on, and it makes the student feel so much better to know there's a reason I struggle, and you start to help them. You see confidence boost. You see them want to come to school. You see them doing and thriving and just doing so much better. And there are a lot of success stories out there. It might be stressful with timelines and things to get there. And for me, it's difficult because I'm there at the beginning point, but I'm not always there at the end point. So what's exciting for me is that, once a student receives an IEP, every 3 years, they are to be reevaluated. And oftentimes I'm not involved. That's just reviewing records and updating things. But sometimes I am involved. And so when I do those evaluations and you see how far they've come and you can directly compare, where they were to where they are. And I can't speak of specific stories, for confidential reasons. But yes. I'll just say there's certain ones that stand out in my mind that came to kindergarten and they had so much trouble controlling their behavior, just in the regular classroom. And now to see them in middle school and doing so well. And it's commendable to the family and the teachers and the support staff, and just how important every single person is in that role. They all are just so crucial to the student.
Sure. Yeah. I think of, teachers and administrators and school counselors and psychologists those like success stories of the graduation ceremonies, like the kids that come back afterwards and like, I got into that college, or I'm in the military, or, things like that, like you said, a lot of times for us, it can be frustrating because we're usually at the pain point of the process where things aren't going so hot. But yeah, I know that's got to be huge for you. So.
Yeah, and you sometimes have to seek it out because it's not always right there in front of you, and you want that immediate see right now how things turn out, and it just takes time, and you have to take time and just hope that what you recommended was the best thing, and it's always nice too as well when families who were because of being stressed, and it has to be so overwhelming coming into these meetings and all of that, but you talk to them later and they can tell you themselves the benefit at home that they've seen as well.
And I know for some families it's that I wish I had done this sooner. Like I wish like you were saying, the earlier the intervention, the better the outcome. I would imagine a lot of families that might have been hesitant to get the evaluation or the services in place at the start, a lot of times wind up wishing they had done it even sooner.
Yes. And also just how important communication is, because just like in regular life, but when we're there at school, whether it's the school staff themselves or the parents, if people just come together and have an honest conversation about where they're at and how they got there with their opinions, and we can all just throw it on the table and have a conversation, you find that things really do resolve and everybody's on the same page. It's just they might be coming from different points.
Well, and off of that, are there like educational advocates? And I imagine you interact with some possibly. Would you recommend parents talking to an educational advocate?
I would recommend for a parent to truly do whatever is going to help them feel comfortable. So, if it's easy as a school to sit around a table and, a parent's getting upset, and it's like, why are they upset? But when you really step back and look at it, there might be 10 people around that table and just one of them. And if having someone sitting beside them that's knowledgeable in what's going on makes them feel comfortable, then absolutely, they should definitely do that. I will say, though, that maybe they should start without that and not just jump to that level, because that can maybe put the school on guard a little bit, that maybe there's some adversarial stuff coming down the pike, and all of that. And if, the parent has that right to do that. Letting the school know, of course, that person would be present. But I would say give the school a chance first. And then if that's needed, absolutely, then that would be welcome at the meeting. And I've only had, fortunately, positive experiences, when an advocate is at the meeting, it's helped things.
Yeah, I know. There's different schools of thought on that it's sort of like lawyering up.
Yeah, it can. That's what I mean. If you just say you're doing that right away, anytime I've been in a meeting truly that's had an advocate there, it didn't surprise us that was going to happen. And there was, conflict between the school and the parent leading up to that point. So that's when I have seen that. But it can. It's up to the parent what they would like to do.
Well, yeah. Anything else you would like for parents or students or others in the mental health field or the private sector to know just about school psychology? What all goes into that?
I think we covered a lot of it. I would say just from the view of a school psychologist, it can be a tough position at times because the decisions you make might go against maybe what a teacher thinks or what a school thinks, and it might go against, in contrast, what a parent thinks. So it's not always making everybody happy, and so it's a tough spot to be in. But, at the end of the day, the child truly is the client, and the decisions being made are hopefully always in the best interest of what that student is needing. So, it might not make everybody happy, but that's truly speaking of advocacy, that's truly what you're doing is advocating for that child. And that can be tough at times, but that's truly what they're trying to do, hopefully, in all their evaluations.
Yeah, that's so well said. You heard it here. Go out and support your local school psychologist, everyone. Because, it is a hard job. It's not easy. And a lot of times you're sometimes between a rock and a hard place with you can't make everybody happy all the time.
You can't. And another thing, it's not just black and white. It's not like if you go to the doctor and take a blood test and, it's positive for a health condition. You have all this data, and it's not just black and white that they have this disability. There's a lot of decision making that goes into that. And it can be stressful at times, it's difficult, but you do look for those rewards, like you had said.
Well, Christy, I know your time is precious, and we got to wrap up here. So thank you again for being willing to be on. That saying of it takes a village to raise a person, and you are such a huge part of that. So thank you so much.
And thank you for having me. I've enjoyed this.
Yeah. Have a good night.
You too. Thank you.
Again, just a huge thank you to Christy Peterson for being able to share some time, have a conversation with me about this important topic of school psychologists and their role within a school district and how they are able to help students and families receive services that they need so much. Next up will be OTC episode 26, where I will be sitting down to have a conversation with Dr. Jonathan Singer, president of the American Association of Suicidology, on the topic of youth suicide. Thank you all so much for stopping by and checking out the podcast. I'll catch you all in the next episode. If you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe and review wherever you're catching this podcast at. You can check out detailed show notes and archived episodes at www.pfsonthecouch.com. If you want to stay up to date on future guests and contribute questions, be sure to follow us on your favorite social media platforms. The author and host of this podcast is not engaged in a therapeutic relationship with the listener and cannot give counseling advice without a confidential appointment. Listeners should be sure to consult with a licensed therapist in their area or seek emergency medical attention if they are experiencing psychological difficulty. A special thanks to the band The Topsy-Turvies for the show theme song. Their song, Like a Living Dead, can be found at topsyturvies.bandcamp.com. The bump interview track was the song 1973 by Bruno E. The author and host of this podcast is John Dennis. Special thanks to editor and show producer Trevor Groff.